To start off with, just like I do with many of my listeners, um, introduce yourself. Tell us your life story. Who are you? What you experienced? How did you discover you had the gifts that you'd have? And well, please be a nice primary source. Keep it fun and educational for the listeners. Your life story from a spiritual perspective. You got the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate you asking me to be part of this. It's really cool. I've been checking out your site online there, the YouTube and the blog stuff. So it's really interesting what you're doing. So kudos to you for getting something like this going for people. The Del Val experience was really a lot of fun. So I'm glad we got to meet through there. As far as who I am and how I got into all of this, I was born in Northeast Philadelphia, and I think from a very early age, my mother reported to me that I tended to do things that seemed a little different from some of the other kids as far as my sensitivities and awarenesses of things. She used to get me out of the crib, from naps when I was about 15 months or so. Didn't have a lot of words, if you will, that I was saying yet, but she had memories of me, getting up out of the crib. She'd put me on the floor, and I would just run to a photograph of somebody who had passed away. And I would just pick it up, and I'd say, I was talking to her. And that's all I would say. And it kind of continued on. I had a cousin who was abducted back in 1968. And I was like 3.5 years old at the time. I had dreams about her. She was abducted and missing for about 6 weeks before they discovered her body. And that was another incident where I would wake up from naps and I was saying things like her name was Candace or Candy. They found Candy in the mud by the water. And of course, nobody really knew what the 3.5-year-old was saying. But at the opening of trout season here in the Neshaminy Creek, the fishermen found her body in the banks or in the mud of the Neshaminy Creek. So it would turn out that I'd been seeing something and saying something. It's just people didn't really understand at that point. You flash forward and I go to school, and I had, again, sort of these flashes. I was highly energetic. Maybe I would have even been called ADHD. Back then they didn't have IEPs and special plans. You were just put in a corner and told to behave. So I think I spent 30% of my school career standing in the corner. That is until a couple teachers tested me for IQ and things like that, and it came back that I was gifted, and they tried to find ways to channel me with writing and art and things like that. But I would know things around me. I would hear things, smell things, see things, and didn't necessarily know that this wasn't normal for everybody to do this. As time would go on, you kind of learn to quiet some of these things down when you discover that other people maybe aren't seeing or sensing things the way that you are. Had a lot of awkward moments too, as you're kind of trying to grow up and go through puberty and all of that. When I was in high school, there were times that some of my friends would notice, again, that I seemed to know things, that I could even repeat conversations that they'd been having at home with their parents, and almost verbatim, I could be saying things that was being said. Some people noticed that when I touched them, that they would have this like sense of calm come over them, and that they would have this real sense of almost like happiness. So I wasn't really sure what any of that was. Again, this is the early 80s. There wasn't a lot being said about all kinds of things. My mother used to say that she knew that in our family there seemed to be people who had ESP. Now, mind you, I haven't heard anybody use that language in a long time now, but I guess that was the words back then. Something else that was happening to me is somewhere around the age of 12, I became fascinated by electronics and electrical stuff, particularly electrical diagrams. I had no idea why, but I was fascinated by this concept of ohms and resistance, and I would draw diagrams, and in hindsight, I now realize that I was perceiving in some way, the energy flows of people and the activity of energy around us. At the time, though, it was just this weird kind of thing. By the time I was 17 or so, I went to school in Northeast Philadelphia and had started having conversations with some of my teachers. I was in the honors classes and AP classes, and that sometimes they gave you room for, more opportunity to explore and discuss different thoughts and things. And I started talking about frequencies. Again, I had no idea where this was really coming from, but the sense that we existed as frequency. GPS was not a term at that time period, but I was referring to our existence as somehow we existed, kind of like the old algebra and graphing things that we used to do with XY axis, that I had a sense that we existed here on Earth as an X marks the spot kind of thing. And I was trying to explain to them that it seemed to me that in the larger universal plan, we had energy signatures, that we existed. Now, mind you, at that time, no real exposure to anything or anyone in 1980 or 81 that was talking about this in any particular way that I would have known. And a couple of the teachers sort of indulged me around this. I also had a fascination around magnetism and magnets, and I wondered why we were not using the natural magnetism of the Earth for transportation, communication, and on and on. I would wind up going to Drexel University. I was studying business. I kind of went mainstream for a while. Was quieted down on some of these other thoughts, but still had a lot of these questions in my mind. Again, still often noticing that my intuition would give me information about people around me. Made me good at sales, actually. I was pretty successful at my co-op jobs and helping people and being in sales. I was in retail, customer service management and retail management, things like that. Graduate from Drexel University. I grew up as an Episcopalian, so I have a sort of traditional Christian background, but I grew up in a church that had a more progressive style minister. As a matter of fact, I grew up hearing, for instance, that bodies die, people don't. And he often used the butterfly as an image about how we transit from here to another space. So it was that kind of progressive perspective, yet still grounded in the traditional sacrament, scripture, liturgy-based kind of religion. As I graduated from college in 1987, I was doing a couple different kinds of jobs and trying to start my own business in marketing and advertising and things like that. My mother was ill, actually, and I wound up becoming her primary caregiver. And she had breast cancer, and it was by the time it was discovered, it was advanced stage. What's interesting about that, though, is I knew something was going on with her. There was something weird. I think she had also spent years masking some anxiety and depression issues, but she was otherwise a very, graceful woman, a very beautiful woman, a very creative woman, who I used to always say I felt she was born in the wrong time, that she would have done better being born when I was born, as far as her thought process and her ingenuity and the things that she cared about in the planet and about people. But I remember going to the doctor one day with her, and the words that came out of my mouth to the doctor is, something's not right. There's something wrong. There's something happening in the upper right quadrant of her body. So I remember the doctor sort of looking at me going, say again. I said, I don't know. I just know there's something going on with the upper right quadrant of her body. Well, it would probably be about another 18 months that they would discover that she had this advanced stage breast cancer that was actually a rarer form that's called inflammatory breast cancer. So this is not detected by mammograms. Matter of fact, her mammograms were clear. Things look good. And it's not detected by feeling a lump because it exists on this cellular level. Anyway, I would then spend 2 years, taking care of her. But she was, in some ways, the deeper introduction and invitation to me beginning to see and feel what else was going on in the world. So I was at a health food store in Philadelphia, and I picked up some pamphlet that talked about homeopathy and talked about herbs and talked about how the American Medical Association had controlled a lot of what we do and don't know about medicine and certainly about our own healthcare. And it really intrigued me as a 25-year-old or so, like, what is this? What's happening? And started doing my own research as best as you can, because again, like we have to put this is the late 80s. So our, how we're connected to the universe and or the internet and all that is something that's still evolving. So there's other ways that you have to get your information in this time period of the late 80s, early 90s. But I do more research, about this and learn more and put my mother on some teas. And we did some other stuff with herbs. One of the things that started to happen too is that I would notice that colors were coming to me, and I didn't know where they were coming from. Just these colors would show up, and she had some really difficult chemo cycles that would really literally change her personality, would just bring out, unfortunately, the worst in her. And at times it was just really hard to watch how pained she seemed to be, not only physically but emotionally, by whatever was flowing through her. Began to tune a little more into that and felt it on different levels, began to perceive that there was more to this body, mind, and spirit experience. Came across Bernie Siegel, who talked about how, our relationship with our bodies and things like that. So the concept that cancer was something that was a lot of repressed emotion began to make an awful lot of sense to me as relative to my mother and how she had lived her life or how she had expressed herself. Otherwise, she was a very healthy woman, like ridiculously healthy. And she felt betrayed. That was the other piece too, that spiritually she felt betrayed by her God, that, she had been a good person who'd lived a good life and made moral choices. How dare I have this cancer? How dare my body betray me? So that was a real window for me as well of understanding, exploring. Began to study certain things with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross work, caregiver cycles, things that we go through. Just like I said, my mother became an invitation to understanding this inventory of everything that can happen to us when we are facing a terminal illness, which is what she was facing. Did a lot of stuff. The color therapy piece started to fascinate me. I didn't know there was anything called color therapy. I certainly didn't know about Reiki or anything. I did know that there was laying on of hands healing through the Christian church, but it wasn't something I necessarily saw. But the color thing, it was just weird. It would come through me. And when certain vibrations or certain frequencies of color, particularly the pinks, would come through me, and I don't know where they came from. It's not even that I called them up. They would appear. They'd come through the top of my head. They'd come down through me, and they'd pop out my chest. I kind of felt like that little album, if you're familiar with, I think it's Pink Floyd. There's that Prism piece, and then there's an album cover for Rush, the music group Rush. It reminded me of a kind of a combination of those two album covers, of prism of light coming down through me and then changing and coming out to her. Whenever that would happen, she would calm down and just change. To much calmer and much quieter and much more peaceful. I had no idea what it was, and it actually kind of scared me. As time would go on, my mother did pass away. There was a nurse at the hospital who came to me. She was actually from Korea. And the nurse came to me. I didn't see her that much. And there had also been some sort of really spiritual kinds of experiences at the hospital in my mother's final days. I had read a book by Shirley MacLaine that talked about how spirit guides show up, and we saw them. My mother could describe who was in the room with her that nobody else saw, but I could see them, and I could also somehow interrelate with whatever these spirit guides were. When my mother actually passed away, the nurse who was from Korea comes to me and says, "You did good. It was your mother's time. Your mother was the healthiest cancer patient we've ever seen for the level of cancer that she had that was everywhere in her body. It's why we had her in the heart unit. We didn't have her in the cancer unit. We admitted her here because we felt that the heart was what was going to go. You did good," is what this nurse was telling me. And of course, your mother's just died. You're not thinking you did good. She's dead. And there she was. She goes, no, you were doing other things. And that was good. It improved her quality of life. keep going, keep studying. Well, time would pass. I was taking care of my family. I was finishing, my sister was younger than me. I was finishing raising her, making sure she was stabilized and moving on with her life. I would wind up entering the seminary to become a minister in the Episcopal Church. I had a lot of experiences, spiritual experiences through the years. I had a lot of people say they either thought I was a nun or they did think I was a minister. And I just, after that time period, I had a couple more experiences that said, you know what, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go become a minister. My focus, though, of ministry was actually on service, though. It wasn't about running a church. That was not what I was being ordained for. My focus of my ministry was about service to others. So chaplaincy work, mission work, community organizing, that kind of stuff. That was really more what I wanted to do. So went through that process with a lot of really kind of weird experiences, great experiences, strange experiences, encounters with the dark that I probably didn't expect and was naive about, thinking I was somehow safe in the church, discovering that is not a safe place, actually, in all honesty, and would move through that experience and become ordained. As a matter of fact, I'll be 20 years ordained this September. So would use had my ministry experience, though, of it started to happen again. I would, go to hospitals to visit people. I would visit shut-ins, and there it was again. I would see things, hear things, smell things, know things that you're not supposed to know. I would be in the hospital, and suddenly I'd have a panic attack because I knew the person's numbers were dropping. And I'd say to the nurse, something's wrong. They'd say, everything's fine. Look at the monitors. And I'm like, no, those aren't the numbers. Those aren't the real numbers. And then within minutes or within the hour or 2 hours, whatever the case may be, it would be happening, whatever it was I saw. Again, there was this piece of, well, what is healing that I was questioning? How are we made? What is why did Jesus heal? I was now beginning to learn that there were these other things out there in the world. What is this? What is the quantum world? What is this conversation about, the quantum science and quantum physics? Just began to do sort of more studies with it because I was very fascinated by what I was experiencing on this level. Also, the experiencing of more mediumship pieces was happening, though I don't always necessarily like to use that term in relationship to myself, or I didn't at one time. I think it scared me. But it was very common for me to have this sense of spirits, persons, energies that had passed on or transited, and some were disincarnates, and some, I'm not sure what they were. Oftentimes before a person left here, there would be odd connections between me and that person, and then boom, they'd be gone, and then there'd be some kind of connection for a little while until I guess they got wherever they were going. So again, I'm, a young woman. I'm in my 20s. I'm in my 30s. I'm then in my early 40s, trying to figure out what is all this stuff that's going on. And then it would transition again in that I was married and 3 children, but my oldest was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And there was always something, autism is what we called it. Asperger's is what they called it, actually. He was diagnosed at 4.5. But I also knew there was just something else, almost mystical or magical about him. And when I had a chance to volunteer with some of his peers, some of the kids, to be honest, seemed almost like they were definitely toxic, I would call it, like they were definitely impacted by something that happened to them, a birth injury, a reaction to a vaccine, whatever the case may have been. And there were these other kids, though, that it made me think of stories I had read that sometimes, we have conditions in this life for lessons, for various reasons. And the way we show up, we may be this way because we are part of a lesson for other people as well. Again, we become invitations. In Buddhism, they talk about that. Sometimes one person becomes the opportunity of mercy, and how the rest of us interact with that person who's challenging or whatever the case may be. that that's the opportunity for mercy, for you to learn something about what that means. So when I looked at my son and some of his peers, it just felt like energetically there was something else going on. And in addition to the fact that actually he did have some birth trauma, and he did have a reaction to one of his early vaccines, kind of. I think he had a reaction to something else, but there was something else going on. And as I began to relate more and more to my son, not from a perspective of, I need to fix this autism. I was, exploring, I was studying, I was taking him to different people that I knew in the healing community. I was looking at it very scientifically, all, kinds of ways. And back in the time period that he was diagnosed, this is before Autism Speaks. This is before the public service. And this is when everybody thinks that if they even know the word autism, they're thinking Rain Man. And that's not exactly what a lot of our kids necessarily look like. There's truly a spectrum to the condition. And so it was also, again, very interesting because things that I would try with my son may or may not work, but oftentimes I wound up sharing the information with other people. And again, it was from a holistic standpoint. And the world today is much more open. Thanks to Oprah and thanks to books and Wayne Dyer and everything like that, I find today, 15, 20 years later, people are much more receptive to talking about certain holistic approaches. Certainly the question about vaccines is much more open, though still heavily disputed, all of that. But with my son, he just definitely had some of his own unique ways that he was wired. And it was at times confounding because of his sensory processing issues, his sense of being overwhelmed at times by the world. And yet at other times it was absolutely beautiful because he, much like my mother's cancer, there was a window and another prism, if you will, that allowed me to tap in to that plane and that dimension and to see what is happening here. And again, frequency and vibration kinds of messages kept coming up to me. So over the course of my son's condition of living with autism and its various facets and sensory processing and other pieces of this, we explored Reiki, integrated energy therapy, color therapy, chakra therapy, all kinds of things, homeopathy, which we actually had quite a bit of success with, and on and on. So he became an invitation for me to go and learn more stuff. There was a woman that I met who was an astrologer, and she wound up doing something about our charts, and she laid our charts on top of each other. And she said, you exist because you have kind of a soul agreement. He's here to learn certain things and do certain things. And so are you. But your relationship is he's not interested in communicating to the rest of the world what he has or, how to heal it or how to make it go away. That's not his thing. But you are. And that's why he has you as the mom. Because whether what you try with him works or not, you are innately, Robin, a teacher and a communicator. And so whether it works or not, 25 other people are going to find out that you tried something. And they may or may not work for them. But that's what you do, is you like to educate people. And so that's why there's this relationship. And that in her charts, she felt that she even saw that at some point his sense of this condition would ease up enough that you might even say that it was healed or gone. So I can say today that, he's 20 years of age. He has quirks about him that, and we all have quirks. Graduated from high school, he drives a car, he works a job, he's starting the community college, and, he's on his way, so to speak. But again, our approach had been this holistic approach all along. Because of Kevin and what we were learning there, we wound up creating a nonprofit in 2005 called Hearts for Autism. And we use art and music and movement and yoga and mindfulness and all kinds of things like that with young persons and, through teenage years on the spectrum. But we were the only program regionally and actually nationally that did what we did, which is it's an integrated family program. So when you bring your kid and you drop them off, there's a program for the caregiver. And we teach mindfulness, and we teach learning to love yourself, and we teach self-acceptance, and we do creativity with the parents. And we had a program for the siblings as well, for different aspects of them, how they wanted to serve in the program. So we're, let's see, what is this now? 13 years or so now into that program. It's a nonprofit. It's everybody's volunteer. We're still kind of got a grassroots feel to who we are. And because I like it to be the way it was, in the sense that it's one of the only recreational-based programs that it's not just driven by your therapy, situation. It's driven by, you come to the program and we love and accept you exactly the way you are. Who are you? We love and accept you. We meet you where you are, and we see where we go from there. And we've had a tremendous experience with everything. And meanwhile, we could use that program. I could use that program for education and advocacy for these last 15 years or so, about our foods that we're eating, about do we really have all the information we need about the medical care, advocacy for really, really, really poor, just piss poor treatment programs for kids and families, the lack of respite programs, the whole, medical approach that mainstream medical is just a lot of times not even the right approach. A lot of people like to use ABA, applied behavioral analysis therapies for these kids. I have my own theories after working with my son and his peers of what approaches really do work based on what's happening in the kid's body. And most of them have sensory integration issues. We talk about it spiritually. They're not grounded. They landed here on planet Earth. They wake up in this body. They're not quite sure how this vehicle drives. I think when the movie Avatar came out, it was perfect. When Sully wakes up in the blue body that's 10 foot tall and it's got a tail, amazing. It's a perfect representation of what is this thing and how does it work and who am I, so learning how to use this human body, this vehicle inside of a society that has all of these weird rules, and people, they don't necessarily mean what they say or say what they mean. It's just we actually live as human beings. We're very unpredictable and, quite frankly, not safe. Which is why a lot of our persons on the spectrum feel safer with their objects or their machines or whatever their preferred topic is, because it's predictable and can be related to. And humans are not necessarily predictable. Today I'm warm and fuzzy and you like me, and tomorrow I'm this person is flying off the handle. And this is, I think, a variable that is, can be problematic. It's problematic for all of us, but there's not quite the coping and adapting skills for the persons on the spectrum for this huge variation in human behavior and human dynamic. So anyway, going on from there, there's all kinds of amazing things that have happened with that. I do have two other children. One had auditory processing and sensory processing issues. He was vaccine injured. That was documented. He had a seizure after having certain shots. Mind you, it took them 10 years to tell me that that's what happened, because I was lied to for the first 10 years. But left him with some issues. Very magical person as well, that boy. He's now 17. Definitely had to have been a shaman in another life. So there were just some of the stuff that comes through him. And he had a lot. So he was another one that I did a lot of development of my own internal programs while researching and studying educational kinesiology and studying yoga and studying working with OTs to develop my own approach for working with these kids. And I developed something called Spectrum Kids Yoga, which focuses on persons who are on the spectrum and their cousins, if you will, that have sensory and auditory issues and other issues. So we would move forward, and there was also a daughter. So I used to joke, by the way, it's the old, be careful what you say because it might come true. I used to say, well, the daughter's great, and she's fine. She's just saving all her issues for her teenage years. Well, lo and behold, I had the two boys, balanced out and doing what they were going to do as best as they could do and the way they wanted to do it. And then the daughter started to, I didn't notice it at first because she was excellent at masking, excellent. And overachiever, high achiever, everything looked great. But what would eventually be revealed is that she had been dealing with anxiety and depression. It had turned into some self-harming, eating disorder, kinds of things. And so my world then for, a couple of years then was walking through trying to understand what eating disorders and disordered eating and everything in our culture about body image and all the pressures that we have for both males and females, but especially our females. So it started me in another level of working alongside of my daughter as she was going through recovery for what is this world and how do we help and how do we advocate, how do we educate people. And so that's a huge issue because it's dealing with things that are, also cultural in the world and all of our psychological issues too that go with that. So I'd mentioned to you before about Serene Teen. Serene Teen was something that my daughter suggested because when she was about 15 or 16 years old, she noticed that a lot of the other teenage girls seemed to just have so many stresses, and social media and the technologies were definitely probably making typical girl behavior worse. My daughter had also been on the receiving end from a boy who masked himself as a girl online of cyberbullying. So that was another piece that we explored is what happens when you are being cyberbullied. So the Serene Teen piece is something that's kind of one of my newer outreaches that is addressing what's happening to our youth. And I work with individuals and I work with small groups, and we're looking to expand the programming. This is, again, we're sort of grassroots and foundationally trying to figure out what are the best places for us to functionally exist and how to serve the population. But being that I have a ministry background, so I will have people call me because they need help with their youth group. They maybe have a lot of suicidal kinds of situations going on. I have other people who are, school psychologists contacting me and saying, hey, here are some families that you can connect with. And here we're using holistic strategies again. We're talking about yoga, we're talking about breath, we're talking about mindfulness and creativity, relaxing into the expectations that everybody is creating, understanding the brain science behind your brain on your mobile device, your brain on these computers, mixed with your brain not being probably mature enough to be exposed to social media networks. And I have a story that I say that to kids that when I was in high school back in the 80s, you were walking down the hallway, or a woman was walking down the hallway, one of the girls, and she gave me a dirty look. I might look over and think, well, what's up with you? And I might tap my friend and go, see that? Did you see she just gave me a look? Did you see that? By the time I got to the end of the hallway or got where I was supposed to be going, somebody else probably gave me a dirty look. Okay. And I may or may not perseverate or even think about the first girl who gave me a look. In today's world, that girl can walk into you, give you a dirty look. You're going to use your cell phone and you are going to create a text, a group text message experience. You're going to put it on, Instagram. And by the time you get to the end of that hallway, this same teenager is going to have been able to perseverate at a rate that will create a neural pathway that is ridiculously difficult to get rid of in the brain and in the emotional makeup of that person. And it begins to put them on hyperdrive all of the time. So if we thought, back in my day that we had cortisol issues, the cortisol issues for people under the age of 30, I think is even more absurd as far as what all is being exposed to. So I'm an advocate on how do we use our devices in healthy ways. Mind you, I love my phone, and I probably have my own little Facebook addiction. I'm not one of those people who says, go hide in the mountains of Colorado and never be connected again. That's, to me, absurd. But can we figure out healthy ways to be using our devices? Absolutely. Flip over to the fact that I think we need to be better informed. I don't believe that any of the people around us, the corporations or the government or anybody, is telling us the truth about the safety of these devices. The 4G, 5G, the number of health conditions that have amplified as EMFs have amplified in use, as all these other things going on in the atmosphere around us. I have several clients now. They're all, from different ages, from the 20s all the way into their 60s, complaining constantly to me about their skin, that their skin is on fire, that it's weird, it's itchy, they can't figure out what this allergy is. And to me, it's the electrical current. It's the EMFs, it's stuff buzzing off of them. And so that's a whole nother conversation. But again, working it through the Serene Teen piece, what we're trying to do is to teach that there are healthy, holistic strategies for being able to approach your life. But meanwhile, trying to work with the parents, with mothers and fathers, so that they know to love and accept their young person, and to love and accept themselves, and to ease up a little bit on some of what's happening. For those who are, not the hypervigilant parent, but maybe they're the kinds that are having their own issues with, recovery or addictions or whatever their thing is, on that side of the parental scope, helping them to be better present for their children and give them the supports that they need. So, like I said, Serene Teen is an amazing, program that we're in the process of bringing more people on board and focus groups to see how can we best serve our young people and our families. And I always say to them, I'd love to shorten your learning curve. I'm 54 years old. If I can, they always talk about these, how you evolve over time, and when you're 20 you feel one way, and you're 25 and 35 and 45 and 50, and they'll joke that by the time you get to be 50 you're like, I don't give an F, I am me, end of story. Well, if I can shorten the learning curve for people so that they can develop that attitude at a much earlier age, so be it. There's just some struggles that we're going through emotionally and mentally that and spiritually, I'm not sure every one of those experiences need to happen that way. Let's really get together as a community of people and share the wealth of our information and our stories and our passions and our heart, so that we are creating a vibrant society and a vibrant community of creative people. That's what we need. And we live in a mind-controlled, society-controlled, commercialism-driven, fear-based, never satisfied, frequency screwed up situation. And so I consider it one of my personal missions here to be helping people. And I teach that in every class. It doesn't matter the age. Every single day there's something really radical you can be doing. Are you breathing deeply? To breathe deeply, to move from fight or flight into rest and digest kinds of deep breathing, meditation, mindfulness kinds of things. Are you eating quality food? Are you drinking quality beverages? Are you laughing? Really radical to be able to just laugh, and not, I'm talking about laughter where we pick on other people, the weird, stupid laughter we see on television. I'm talking about just laughter, just joy. Can you find your joy? You were inherently designed to have joy, not misery, joy. Can you tap into it and find the abundance that goes with that? And the other is, every day, are you being creative? Nothing breaks the mind control frequency wavelengths as much as creativity. The second you and I, Andrew, get together and we start saying, hey, wouldn't it be fun if? Hey, wouldn't it be great if? It's amazing what happens to the other frequencies that are trying to distract you and disillusion you and, take you down other paths that probably lead to either a drug or some kind of, adaptive thing, or some product you're supposed to buy, or some TV show you're supposed to watch, or something, you're supposed, mindless scrolling on Facebook. So breathing, again, quality eating, quality drink, laughter, joy, love, service, creativity. So that kind of brings you up to where I am right now, in the world.
Wow, fascinating life story there. I love it when I have someone who can keep talking without me having any interest at all in interrupting, which is something I try not to do with my guests. And sometimes I filibuster my guests a little too much. Been criticized for that, but I didn't have to really do that with you at all. Well, hopefully I won't have to do that much with some of the other things I want to discuss. Give me a few talking points there that I jotted down on my little notepad here. First of all, I guess we'll start off, you seem obsessed with hearts. I mean, you got Hearts for Autism, Happy Hearts Yoga, Pink Hearts Wellness for Women. Those are the 3 websites that could be linked off your Facebook page. And, well, are you the kind of person that always goes with the heart, or for variety's sake, do you try to go with the third eye and some of the other chakras?
Yeah, I know it is interesting. You're right. I don't think at first I even fully realized that there was always this sense of heart energy with me. And again, when I was observing people, when I was a lot younger and didn't necessarily have the language, and we didn't have the benefit of what I call the, from the 90s on, there was this evolution and explosion of information. So I can remember being a young person and just noticing that there would be people who buzzed, that's the way I saw it, buzzed too much out of their head, oftentimes seemed to have some stomach buzzing going on. And I mean, they might be successful in life, but I wasn't sure about the happiness piece. There just seemed to be a lot of misery. And then, but there was another group of people that if they buzzed a little bit more in the heart area, there seemed to be a giving energy. There seemed to be something like a compassion maybe. There seemed to be an ability to sort of cope and adapt a little bit differently versus pushing one's way through, things like that. So those were just, it was just stuff I was observing. Then there was the way I was made in my family. And then later on, actually doing the studies, you're right. When I first came up with Hearts for Autism, the autism group that I was coming up with was originally called Across the Rainbow, and it had 2 components. One of them was Spectrum Sports, and the other was the Hearts for Autism. And I had more people interested in volunteering and helping with the art program. Besides, there were already other parent-led sports groups. So I'm like, okay, cool, we go the art way. And I then realized that I think it was like the angels or the spirit team around me are the ones who made me look at the word one day and go, wait a minute, the word art is inside of heart. Oh my God, this is great, And then what happened is I have a background in finance and marketing. That was my degree. So I'm marketing-wise thinking, that's really great. And I start running the program. And about 6 months after I'm running the program, parents started reflecting back to me, we love the fact that you call it Hearts because we can just feel the energy of, we can just feel the love coming out of the rooms. And we can feel the acceptance. And I went, oh, okay, well, that's good. Because we are loving and accepting and, kind group of people. But then I realized it was definitely a vibration. I always said the angel Gabriel was behind this, running it. So yes, I have a real connection to heart energy. I talk about the sense of having that internal compass that orients you towards, again, where is my joy? So I'm big on that. Vibrate at the rate of your greatness, or a successful day. To me, the real measure of success is how much joy are you experiencing every day. So you're going to have everything in the world, but if there is no joy, then I'm not really sure what ultimately is happening for your soul's sake. So yes, but to me though, the way I'm wired, something that's going on in my heart space for me will connect automatically to my intuitive and third eye. So there's a way in which I personally tune my chakras into all of this, of aligning me in a way to be able to maneuver. And I also know when I go out of balance, because there's some things that just don't work out for me the way I might want to, because quite frankly, I wasn't grounded enough, or I didn't know how to put one foot in front of the other. I couldn't think my way through it. I started to try, maybe I was trying to answer too many of my own questions on my own, though I tend to be very resourceful and love working collaboratively with other people. But yeah, hearts are there. I do have other approaches. I have a coaching thing that it's Abundant Life Mission that, I do have something new that I'm working on called Ninja Calm. So there are no hearts in that. It might be the post 50, Robin. that's doing some of that. But yeah, definitely connected to this, to the energy and the science, if you will, about who are we in the heart space, and what does that mean interdimensionally, and really in the manifestation of our lives.
Well, the thing you said about how the word art is in heart makes you wonder if that's not an accident. And the thing about art is it's kind of hard to come up with a definition for art, as I found out in my when I was in ninth grade music and art class. Teacher asked us in groups come up with a definition of art, and didn't realize how hard it actually was for to do it. And this is always a question that makes for good radio conversation. But when you say the word art is in heart, I can imagine you're basically saying, well, if you make a definition for art, it better have something to do with heart soul essence, be related in some way, or else it's not a genuine definition. Am I on the right track, or am I maybe taking?
Oh, I think that's I think that's probably a brilliant observation. That's right. There's something about the art of I'll say that the art of life. There's the skill sets that we're either born with or that we're cultivating over life. But the sense of the art of life is, I think, how we're managing and incorporating the heart of who we are. So what does that mean? Well, again, the art of life. Well, there's, maybe your mother wanted you to be a pharmacist, but there's another part of you that does something else, and you can make a living and you can do great. But at the end of the day, what brings you alive? What makes you vibrant? And we can contribute at every level when we're tuning in to this sense of the art and heart of who we are. So there's all kinds of ways of being creative. I teach creativity classes, and people are like, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist. Okay, well, but let's put that aside, because we have these really high standards in a country that ultimately seems to be promoting mediocrity. We have sort of ridiculously high standards on some levels. Everybody wants to be the Michael Jordan or the high, whatever the stars are today of everything. And the reality is it's not that complicated. We can really be simple and be expressive. And that's the thing, is the more that we are able to cultivate, like what you're doing right here, is a great and amazing thing. You give people a place to express who they are, their opinions, their passions. That's creativity. That's art right there. There's energy flowing. We're all connecting. Whether maybe we don't even agree with each other's definitions of whatever it is, but you give people a venue. You give people a place to express. Wow, how powerful. But I'll have people say, oh, I'm not creative. And I'll look over at them and say, is your house all white? And they're like, well, no. Well, really? What's the color of your kitchen? Why'd you pick that? Do the dishes match? What outfit are you wearing? Why are you wearing that? And do you like to cook? Do you use spice? You don't use spice. Do you like flowers? Do you garden? Why did you pick the colors of the car that you did? And you begin to make sort of help people recognize, to awaken, be aware to the fact that we are all creative. We're all made in the image of Creator, and have a creative energy and a co-creative force. And as you tune into that, it's magical sorts of things happen when we step out of the some of these other models of the way we drive society.
Thank you. Interesting observation there as well. And talking about you mentioned the autism spectrum and Asperger's and other disorders on the spectrum. Don't know if disorder is a proper word here, but very familiar with the work of Mary Rodwell. Ran into her at a recent conference at ESETI. She's always talking about things like how people with autism spectrum disorders, savants and whatnot, they do have a very, very strong connection with star families, as if they were implanted here on Earth in some way to raise the vibrations. And well, it's no wonder they're having trouble on this planet. People with autism spectrum disorders are, because they're not really supposed to resonate with a planet that was designed to be well, it wasn't designed, I should say, but is, because of manipulation and whatnot, a lower vibration planet. And these people are here to raise the vibrations. when you're talking about people with autism spectrum disorders, and you try to help them, I mean, how is it? How do you go about helping them and assisting them, and also, is it worthwhile or not in their best interest to make a big stink about the fact that they have the disorder, or is it better? Do you think maybe it's better to keep a low profile if someone has an autism spectrum disorder? Keep a low profile about it, because that's maybe going to keep the magic a little bit, if you get my drift. So,
Right.
well, you say right. So you think maybe there is something to that. Is that something you preach, or do you think people need to be open about their disorders for acceptance sake and whatnot?
Well, that, yes, and all of that. And what I would say, though, is, being an advocate for parents and working with parents who are on the spectrum, from what we call the Jenny McCarthy TACA group, that really talks about all of the holistic pieces of what can be done to, quote, cure. They'll use the word cure autism, all the way to the other group who will say there is no cure for autism. Then you have self-advocates who are adult, autistic persons who may be saying there's nothing wrong with us, leave us alone. We talk about a spectrum. It's this crazy, whirlwind vortex of all kinds of stuff. And so what happens is when families show up and ask for assistance, or show up to, maybe they just showed up for art that day, but I'll get, I guess what you would call it peer parenting, coaching, and mentoring. I do. I literally just tune in intuitively to, where is this family? where are they? And what's happening? And in relationship then to also tuning into the person who is affected. So years ago, I started using the word conditions. You mentioned about disorder. I started using the word conditions because, again, the power of the language we use does affect things. And so we called it a disorder. There's just a whole energy that goes with that. So almost all of my advocacy was around that. However, in certain circles, the word disorder, autism spectrum disorder, is just easier to say. It's the medical term. I remember the one, Autism Speaks, which is the largest fundraiser, and many of us questioned the way the money's ultimately used. I actually had one of their executive vice presidents say to me, your language, the way you market yourself, the way you try to fundraise, ultimately you're going to have trouble. And here was the words, really powerful. Misery makes money. Now, flash back to my Drexel degree and dual major in finance and marketing. Flash back to, wait a minute, that's right. Certain ways of telling the stories are certainly a way to make money. So make autism seem as miserable as possible. And you're an organization that show the worst of everything. Yeah, that can be a real moneymaker. But I'm not sure how ultimately how it really helps everybody. I have families that have young people who are severely impacted. For whatever reasons, they are severely impacted. And they will tell you they don't have the savant, and they don't have, the warm, fuzzy, magical kid. They'll flat out tell you that they just have had a really, difficult experience. Now, mind you, they love their child, and they love the way they connect with the child. But when they see some of these other stories out there, they feel that they're almost romanticized. And so this also trickles over to some of our adult advocates who will say, by the time they're in their 20s and their 30s, they may be advocating, saying there was nothing wrong with us, we're part of some special group, starseeds, whatever, or whatever the case might be, leave us alone. Well, I've interviewed some of the parents of some of these adult ones, and they're like, yeah, this kid used to climb the walls. This kid ran from the house into traffic. This kid had major serious issues that required intervention, couldn't sit still in school. He may think he's lovely and wonderful today, and we need to leave everybody alone. However, if you go back and look at the childhood, there was definitely some impacted social behavior and impact on personal health and well-being, actually. So I think we have to look at these statements honestly. And the autism community, to me, is a very divided community. And I personally suspect that this might even be on purpose, because if we really all got together and discussed the truth of what we're experiencing and how we're experiencing it, and how we have the largest neurological, it's not just neurological, it's a neurobiological, biochemical alteration. There's just no way you have a gene mutation that's this big, and without us all being exposed to radiation. Radiation will do that. Where, well, we dropped the bomb. Look, those people all look different now. This is something's definitely off, and we're not being given all the information. But then working with the families, again, it has to be unique, because where are they in their language? And maybe, just what are the approaches? Years ago, when I talked about Reiki and homeopathy, most people already thought I had 5 heads. This just added 2 more. I had 7 heads. What the heck is that? Now some of those same families or brand new families coming in the program are like, oh, I heard about that Reiki thing. Is that something that can help? So they're open, because of the internet and things like that. So I try to gently guide them. I don't preach any particular thing, because to me, again, it is unique to every person and every family. How are you going to work well together to address whatever it is that's happening with these young people? And to me, there are a few ways to get onto the spectrum, as far as how we're experiencing. So yes, there are the group of people who say that they're really all just part of some, like you said, the starseed or the family, and they're here to raise the vibration of the planet. There's that piece. Other people refer to them as the canaries in the mine, that they're the ones showing us that something is severely wrong with our environment, and our bodies are having trouble keeping up, and our wiring is having trouble keeping up with so much of what's going on. And there are other people who are just like, well, that's just the way it is. He was born this way, or so it's there's a lot to that, that sense of it. So when I'm working with people, it is an individualistic piece if I'm working with a family, because I may be running them through an analysis too. First off, family dynamic, but I may be looking to see what else is going on in the family and what we know about what were mom and dad like when they were kids, because that you do have genetics, and then you do have imprints and things like that. And then moving into the environment, if anything unusual happened in utero, is there anything unique about, where they live or anything like that? For instance, there's a ridiculous high number of people, of women that I went to school with that lived in a particular area of Northeast Philadelphia, that there's quite a few of us that went to Thomas Home School, or we went to schools in that particular area of Philadelphia that have at least one kid who is clearly flat out on the spectrum, like autistic, or maybe they're on the spectrum or spectrum-ish. Well, that's interesting. And was a school psychologist that pointed out to me that when she was doing intakes, the number of us who grew up in the same area, who then also had at least one kid presenting with a condition, being born in the 90s, these kids were in early 2000s, there was a huge, what's going on there? What was going on in our bodies that may have contributed to, what this condition is for this person. So, there's that piece. There's the sensory integration piece that goes on, whether or not, again, how is this person relating to the world? And again, it can be very overwhelming, their sensory systems. If you look at the way the brain is made, autism, people have been treating it as if you can actually address this from a prefrontal cortex. Let me have you repeat your name 190,000 times, and then you're going to know your name, or say, how do you do? And, that kind of thing. And the reality is some of what's going on in the brain, and this was a channeling that came to me many years ago, is that a lot of what goes on in autism is actually a malfunction of the limbic system, as also related to the primitive brain as well. But it's a malfunction of how our amygdala and hippocampus and hypothalamus and a series of things that are going on inside of the brain are relating, and you get overwhelmed. And then meanwhile, people are trying to sit you in a chair and teach you, and you're like, oh my God, you don't understand. There is a 50-piece band banging in my head, while you're trying to, and all around me energetically, while you're, trying to, teach me and reward me with M&Ms. So there's a lot, that goes into this. But yeah, there is that piece. You do see that there is an evolutionary pattern. My friends on the spectrum, those of us who are parents, we sometimes joke that if something were to blow up in the world, the most well-mannered people would actually be the persons on the autistic spectrum because they've been taught manners. And so my son will, supposedly has, he's not supposed to have the same empathy or communication skills. He's the one who will walk into the room, actually look other peers in the eye, look the teacher in the eye and say, how are you today? And it's not a, automatron programmed, kind of, he's genuinely asking. And people can barely look up from their phones, the typical, so to speak, can barely look up from what they're doing. We've had school administrators where our kids with autism are standing there going, good morning, and nobody behind the desk who's supposedly neurotypical is even looking up and saying, hi, how are you? But so we have a feeling that if the world blows up, these people will have some creative way that they figured out how to survive, and they will be the people who have manners, because that seems to have been some form of interconnectedness that is somehow being lost in the society that we're in today.
Okay, interesting take on autism there. By the way, you mentioned one of the first things you mentioned in your beginning introduction of the life story there. A relative or a friend of yours was abducted. Is that a kidnapping abduction by a human being or an alien abduction?
No, it was kidnapping.
Oh, okay. Well, is it well, dare I say it, is it possibly a abduction dealing with like the reptilian aliens who feed off of energy? Like allegedly that's where many of the missing children are going to. They're kidnapped by people who work for reptilian aliens who feed off of the energy of children. So is there any?
No, that's actually interesting. That it's interesting that I chose to even use that word now that I'm thinking about it. But I've used the word abducted since I was a child. It's kidnap. And by kidnap, really what happened is that she was going to a bus stop, and she lived a couple houses away from us. She was supposedly going to a bus stop to ride into a particular area of the city to meet up with her boyfriend, and she never arrived, and she never came home. In our house, there was a strong smell of cigarette smoke that night. She was the only person who ever smoked in our house, and I kept having dreams, about her. But the case was actually only closed. Matter of fact, it was on CBS News or something like that a couple of years ago. They just closed the case like 2 years ago. It was one of those 40-year cases that remained open, and they closed it in a weird way, but nonetheless, they finally closed the case. But what appears to happen to her is that there were some young guys that used to, it was the end of the 60s, they would shoot up drugs. And they would do things like take animals and shoot them up with drugs to see what kind of reaction they would have. And apparently sometimes they did this to girls as well. And so she may have known, she probably did know one of the people that was in the car that probably pulled up, grabbed her, put her in, shot her up with some drugs, and in essence killed her. Then they didn't know what to do with her, and eventually wound up dumping the body. But it is interesting, you said that I use the word abducted because I think for me there was just I could feel her energetically. She was around me for years, and it was when my own daughter was born that her energy became even stronger, and then she just kind of went on her way. But I think the word abduction there for me had to do with the fact that she was almost rapidly taken from life, and she didn't know what to do with that. But the flip side to that is I have a real issue with the drugs and the drug culture in our country and how these drugs show up. And so like up where we are in Newtown and things like that, and people are talking about all these opioids and things like that. I'm like, that's no mistake. I believe this is an absolute infusion into our communities to break communities and to break families. I don't think this is an accident. I took too much of my knee medicine. I think it's a systematic strategy. So I don't know if maybe that somehow links to your reptilian group that, we can keep breaking, I don't know if there's an energetic way for these people to be vampired through their drug use and their self-harming. I don't know. I'm going to guess you know a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, but I think it may fall out of the scope of what's need to be talked about for this interview. Going to a more lighter thing, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the science behind the thing that you did at the Delaware Valley University. Thing works, the whole thing with the singing crystal bowl meditation. Why don't you tell us the science behind how that works, and what kind of frequencies specifically do you think are the most key to use, and what kind of crystals are the bowls made of, and all the rest of it, all the science behind that art. So go ahead, you got the floor.
Sure. The frequency work piece, again, when I said when I was younger, I used the words with not, quite knowing, and was fascinated by brain waves and things like that. Flash forward, and then I was working with, my son on the spectrum, and more frequency information started coming forward. But I had gotten tuning forks. I was trying to think when it was. I think it was 2002 into 2003. I was attuned to a modality called integrated energy therapy, which is a variation on Reiki that involves angelic healing as well and things like that. But I became exposed to tuning forks at one of those retreats, and I was blown away by it. It just felt incredibly magical. And these particular tuning forks were channeled in by one of the IET master instructors, and she had gone swimming with dolphins, and she went to climb out of the water, and she heard this message: you were going to make tuning forks, and she didn't even know what a tuning fork was, and somehow creates these different tuning forks, which I wound up buying this whole set. I thought it was amazing, and I brought them home and started using them, and I watched my all three of my children respond. And then I started slipping it into sessions with parishioners, just saying, "Oh, it's it helps soothe you," and then over time. So this has been a combination of some training and a lot more of my own intuitive and sort of channeling in pieces. I definitely know something comes through from some star group as far as the way I use. I've been told over and over again by people who observe me that the way I use the tuning forks and the way that I even play the bowls it's different. You feel the heart, or you feel some kind of flow that's a little bit different than just a mechanistic kind of, this is how you use this tone this way. Because I can even tweak the tone. So that frequency that's on that particular tuning fork or that bowl should pretty much be set. And yet, working with people who are musicians and who are, kind of really tuned in, will tell me they know that I'm, that somehow we're bending that some of those frequencies around. And that to me has to do with the way we're working with the quantum field of that human being and the torsion field of that human being. So that's sort of a beyond aspect of it. But the crystal bowls I have are quartz crystal. They're beautiful. They were part of a chakra set, so they ran the classic notes of the scale. And I had those. I have another bowl that's tuned another way. With the one store that I work out of, Solutions in Newtown, she just bought some new bowls, and so there's a beautiful phenocite bowl that she has that she allows me to borrow and use. I believe that she has some new bowls that are auralite, and there's something with selenite. So they all have unique sounds and healing properties. Again, it's frequency. Somehow these pieces are relating to the way that you are vibrating. And everything has an energy signature, from your name to your favorite color to the day you were born to the animals you're noticing on the street to just the way the wind blows. Everything has energy signature and is relating to you through your consciousness. And these signatures are, again, it's like information. It's light traveling, and it has light and sound, and it has information that connects us to the grids and the matrix and the dimensions around us. And so you can literally just bang a tuning fork, and people are like, "Wow, cool, that was great," and you just feel better. And that was all you were doing, was helping to suspend the monkey mind, the monkey chatter, so that they could relax enough to actually meditate. I've had a lot of people say that to me, that they can't meditate, but they come to my, my events, and and it's a group, worse yet, and they're like afraid to be distracted. And something in the combination of the bowls and the tuning forks, they're like, wow, what happened? Well, what happened is there's a part of your brain that its responsibility is to constantly be scanning your world. It's scanning, looking for danger, and that's where a lot of people who have anxiety or OCD kinds of issues, that part of the brain is overactive. And it needs ritual, or it needs routine. It needs to be reassured. It needs to know it's safe. Well, what's interesting is when we do things like where people are coloring, it starts to quiet that part of the brain down. If we're playing certain kinds of music, or that quiets certain breathing, will quiet that part of the brain down. So the tuning forks and the sound bowls and those frequencies do a similar thing, and they start to distract and kind of quiet that scanning I'm on brain into, oh, well, all right, this feels good. I'm just going to lay back. And then that taps you into other parts of your particularly your right hemisphere, connecting you to the heart, connecting you to things around you. So different frequencies will connect you in different ways. I had one woman recently. I do weddings. I'm a wedding officiant. Somebody who was an event coordinator contacted me, and she happened to mention. She goes, "Oh my God, I had the worst experience with a crystal ball meditation." She goes, "I could not. It was horrible. I couldn't stand the sound of this thing, and it was like I couldn't get away from it." So I asked a little bit more information, and I almost intuited immediately that she'd had a problem with this particular bowl that would have most likely had to do with the head area. And I'm just trying to count up here for a moment. So if it was on a C scale, I'm guessing that this was probably an A or a B bowl, but I'm thinking it was a B. And it was just too much for her because of stuff that was going on in her thought process and her mind. And it was just a lot. She wasn't able to, relax into it. The person who was doing the meditation only had one sound bowl. If they had more, maybe she would have related more powerfully or, better, if you will, to one of the others. So when I play different bowls, often I get feedback. This one really touched me. I felt it in my right ear, not my left ear, and, on and on. Tuning forks, the same thing. So there are, so I am using a scale, that in one way of typical notes, if you look at it that way. But then I'm also have tuning forks. I have a couple tuning forks that I've created on my own that go with what I call heart tuners. And this is when I was, this is particularly true, 2011 into 2012, I started to get a lot of messages about how to be working with frequencies. I was actually taking classes with Dr. Richard Bartlett back then in his matrix energetics. And it was really powerful. And I had a chance to speak to Dr. Bartlett at one of the programs. And I said, there's something really powerful coming in that has to do with frequencies and healing. Now, mind you, I wasn't using a tuning fork or a bowl. It was just me being tuned to different frequencies. And I said, I'm hearing things and seeing things. And is it all right if I kind of play a little bit here? And so he let me have a couple of his other participants, and we played on the side with this energy of these frequencies that I'd ask people to kind of go into their heart space. And I'd, like a pebble in a pond, I'd ask you to go into your heart in a particular way, in a meditational way, and then sort of throw issues into the pond of your heart, if you will. And as these things sort of, they did this, and through their imagination, their intention, tossed these things into the pond of their heart, I would see ripples, or I would see resonance, or I would see frequency, and I would play the notes that help to harmonize those issues. It could be pain in the body, it could be emotional pain, whatever. And so we were getting positive feedback on that. And that was, like I said, 2011 or so. 2012, I flat out heard, you're going to actually start using those tuning forks that you got 10 years ago. You're going to be using them more, in more ways. And so that was a piece that was coming up as we seem to be having a more rapid evolution of humans. So there was a lot more going on, a lot more people waking up, a lot more stuff that was buried in people that was rising up to be healed. And that whole 2011 and 2012 gateway was a powerful time for me. And that's when I got the crystal bowls. And I started using those because they just have such a beautiful, powerful way to relax people, to welcome people. And then again, I think if they're played with heart, should I say, My father was a saxophonist, and he was an amazing saxophone player who could sight read. You could give him any piece of music. But he always said his best friend was the better saxophone player, who, by the way, couldn't read music, because that guy could play anything by ear, and he played with heart. So the story always stayed with me when my father told me that, because I've had that experience of being around sound healers that they do functionally, use the bowls or functionally use the tuning forks, but the sense of the playing it musically, that may, or in a way that really harmoniously impacts people, it seems to be a little bit different. And so one tuning fork that I use quite a bit is the 528, which is kind of like a C. It's near a C, but it's not a C note. But 528 is studied in France and Germany and other places, and probably studied in this country, but it's hidden information. But that is one that's known for DNA repair. It also connects with heart and well-being and other ways as well. So that's one I use a lot. There's a particular frequency that's near an F sharp. I use that a lot. I have other ones I use at the time period that people are transiting, passing out of this, world, or similarly if we're doing cord cutting. I have one that's a really, really low tone that I use for what I call acutonics, which is kind of combining acupressure and meridian work with using the tuning forks on key, energy channels of the body. So, there's the science in the sense of the tuning, the vibrational aspect of who we are. A lot of people are always surprised when we talk about it that if you have two pianos in a room and you're tuning one piano, the other piano will tune with you. If you have a violin laying on a table and you're playing a violin, that other violin will start to play. It's in resonant frequency. So we as humans go into resonant frequency with each other. So we go in tune and out of tune with people. And there's people that definitely, you might say that struck a chord, there's phrases that we use. So things like that. So we as humans are existing in a way in which we can tune each other. Some people use the word entrainment. There's other ways to look at this. There's really a lot on the spectrum of this, the science, if you will, of how we can relate to one another. And again, the person who is maybe the facilitator, intentional or unintentional. What I mean by that is, you go to a class, and you went to my meditation at the High Vibe event, and, obviously expected me to lead. But, think about when you're in a group dynamic. You can have somebody in the group that just has a much more powerful something. And somehow eventually everybody kind of begins to become part of who they are. And you might have one or two people who are like resistant to it. They're like, well, I can't be in that person's energy. I can't be in this field. They're too much for me. They're too powerful, or they're too whatever. So we're always in each other's energy field and each other's frequency and each other's vibration and each other's and resonant frequency. And a lot of what I'm trying to do with some of using the bowls and the tuning forks and some of the other modalities that I use with people is to awaken people to how they're made vibrationally, how they're made, what their energy signature is, what are the ways that they can improve the energy flows in their body and around their body. I always, say, particularly to young people, after 30 plus years of doing studies on quantum physics and then the quantum experience, to me, it's very simply, summed up with what can you tune out and what can you tune in? And and to be working with a vibration that grounds you and yet exalts you at the same time, that expands your consciousness and invites and embraces all the amazing aspects of who we are as creative beings. And to me, the tuning forks and my heart tuners and those bowls that I use are ways in which I help people tap in to who they are. It helps to release blocks in the body. It helps to bring things to the surface that need to be looked at. And then it also helps to connect them to maybe the messages that they've gotten. It can help connect them through, it's a vibroacoustic. So you're hearing it, but you're feeling it. And so it's cellular, you're feeling it on the cellular level and you're having that experience. At the same time, it is working with the grid of the energies around you, your own energy bodies. And so people come to me for angel readings, and I do a half-hour angel reading with you, but it always ends with a sound healing piece because I'm tuning you to the message, tuning you to the angels, tuning you to the grid that is around you, that we have way more resources and way more information and multiple templates that we can tap to be improving our condition every single day. So that's a little bit of what's going on with me and these amazing tools of vibrational healing.
Awesome. But your voice was drowning out a little bit there. Can you say something so I know I'm not losing you?
Here I am.
All right. Okay, fine. That sounds a little better. I don't know why I was drowning out there, but okay. Thank you for that. Keep up the good work with that. I definitely felt some benefits from the crystal bowl healing that I was at Del Valle University, where you were leading. That was definitely beneficial, I believe, and so you know what you're doing. Keep up the good work. Moving on to I'd like to get on with the thing. Get back to that Serene Teen thing. You mentioned it earlier. Now, the thing about this, I want to point out that brilliant indigo child from Argentina named Matias De Stefano. Love his work, big fan of his work, and I was really excited when he got an interpreter to translate his presentations into English, because he, for a while, you can only listen to them in Spanish, and it was a shame, because he seems like the ultimate expert when it comes to chakras on a macro and a micro level, and many other spiritual things for that matter. And one interesting thing he pointed out in a presentation back in the day, shortly before 2012, I think it was, I'm drawing a blank on the reason behind why he said this is the case, but he did say it's not an accident that in this day and age, so many people around the world are acting like the teenager. And he meant that, I guess, a stereotypical way. Why are we all acting like the teenager? And he explained why. You'll have to check back on that presentation and understand why. It's on Greg Prescott's In 5D channel, by the way. But anyhow, if that's the case, that everybody's acting like a teenager and there's reasons for it, then one would think that whatever you're doing in the Serene Teen thing to help teenagers find life empowerment and stress relief solutions and whatnot would actually work for anybody of any age, if everybody in this day and age is acting like a teenager. So am I on the right track there, or what?
That's actually great.
Do you think so?
Hang on a second. I wasn't sure if we got disconnected because somebody else is dialing in. So hopefully you might hear a weird beeping. You know what? That's a great piece. I definitely have to go back and check out, look into what you just said on my own, because that's pretty powerful. So yes, you're right. Everybody who's having these, teen outbursts, which is kind of interesting when I think of our present administration and the world leadership situations we have going on. This is, I think a lot of the strategies that we're working with young people do apply to working with their parents and their grandparents as well. The difference, I guess, energetically is that I find that we're embracing the teens at the level that they're here. Like, wow, hey, you really chose to show up at an interesting time, and I have a great deal of respect for you. For who you are and that energy that you're bringing into the world, and how is it that we can better support you in that process? So there are times, I have to tell you, I'm working with some people who are young people who are in their teen years, and those who are under 27 or so, and I'm really blown away by some of the energy it just blows me away how. It's like, wow, what a privilege actually to connect to the energy. And a lot of times some of these persons who are experiencing distress in different ways say, I feel like I can actually breathe. I feel like I'm seen, like you see me, and it's okay. And that's kind of an interesting feedback as well. But vibrationally, this is a really, 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 really amazing and powerful group that we have coming through. And yes, we have the indigo and rainbow and crystal and dolphin children and things that we don't even have names for. Really, really powerful generation that's sitting with us right now.
No question about that. You mentioned the quantum world and how you like to research that. and how it works. Do you think maybe you're doing yourself a hindrance there? A little debate there on the quantum world is you don't really want to obsess so much about the quantum world, because when it comes down to it, the quantum world, that is the nature of how the third dimension of consciousness works. And if you're obsessing so much about that, well, one would say you may be stuck in 3D. But
Right.
but then again, well, it's an interesting area. There's a lot of things in quantum physics that that I think are certainly interesting, and you can't expand your consciousness into the higher realms of 3D and consequently get into 4D if you don't obsess about the quantum level. So how do you know when obsessing too much about the quantum world and trying to learn about it too much may be a problem in regards to keeping your consciousness suppressed to 3D? How do you know when to draw the line and move on from that?
Yeah, because as you were speaking, I get this weird knot in my stomach, like, ugh, like when you were in school and you're like, oh dear God, too much information, too much. I think that's why I say to people, it's simple. It's what can you tune out and what can you tune into. To me, ultimately, it's great that you even brought that point up, and I'm so glad that you did, because collapsing the wave into thinking we need to know all of these details is collapsing the wave into that, instead of sort of staying in this space of possibility and the fact that there's far more going on than we even know. We can even pretend to know. But I do think or perceive that we vibrationally are aware that there is something more. And as we open up and tune into this is where, quote unquote, the magic and the miracles are happening. So as we open up, so you're right, you could, in my case, I even actually when people have asked me to teach, they're like, oh, can you teach the tuning forks to me? And historically, I've said, no, I'm starting to do it now because I've had a sort of an opening up inside of me that I've begun to understand how to articulate what it is that's going on. Up to this point, I was told you just need to show it. You don't need to be, doing this other piece just yet. But when people start to ask me too many specific questions, so sometimes I meet other sound healers who start saying, or hitting me. When I teach Reiki classes, I do a Reiki share, and people will show up at the Reiki share with whoever they trained with. And they're like, oh, well, you're supposed to do this and that and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, stop. It's energy. Did you breathe? Do you have a good heart? Do you have a good intention? Are you a compassionate person? And then how are you aligning and attuning with the morphic field of whatever it is that you think you've studied and under the 17th degree certified, whatever it is that master thinks that they are. It's energy. It's flow. It's vibration. So that's when I have a reaction to the too much third dimension, because to me it starts to feel like too much ego, too much territory, too much, how do I patent this and copyright that and, protect. Now, mind you, we live in the third dimension. People do need to monetize. They need to protect, intellectual property and things like that. I get all that. We have bills to pay. And that's why, some of those aspects of understanding third dimensional existence while doing really amazing things that are coming across from all kinds of dimensions and planes to arrive inside of us and come through us. That's all happening. But, for me, if it starts to be that there's too much detailed articulation being requested, that will shut me down, because it's just like, stop, that's too much. Go back to the heart, go back to the flow, go back to being able to, truly vibrationally tune into what's happening within yourself, your own sense of center, and then the world around you. But yes, you're right. There's so much going on with that, and there is a temptation for it's one of those conversations we have. Sometimes for me, the conversation around shamanism is of interest, because that is a very third dimensional way in which people can be relating. And I've been working with a lot of young people who've been showing up, and I keep hearing this message that these are the shamans of the new light. So there's a need for ritual. There is a need for, because we're human, there's this need for ceremony or ritual or understanding how we use the elements around us. At the same time, it's not supposed to be about some of the really kind of intense and, quite frankly, at sometimes sort of ego-based styles of shamanism that's out there, but moving into this other energy. And again, it just, kept coming up a lot in 2017 into 2018. This word of these are the shamans of the new light, and they vibrationally have a way of understanding how to connect people who otherwise feel very disconnected from their environment and their earth and their native and natural self, but yet connecting them to that they are these light beings, and that they're connected to these other universal patterns and intergalactic patterns as well.
Thank you. Like to, I guess we'll talk about yoga a little bit now, because you seem to be very big on that. I'm big on that too. Take yoga classes Saturday mornings, and been doing a couple on Wednesdays recently when I didn't have a guest on. Tuesday advanced class is over now. Don't know if that'll start again, but I really look forward to going to India next March for the International Yoga Festival, which I should have gone to this past year, but when I got to the UK, I was not allowed India because I didn't have an e-visa to go to India, which I had no way of knowing I needed to get based on the information I had, which don't even get me started. That was a pain in the ass of the ultimate ticket to have to go through that trouble. But anyhow, they're letting me use the ticket that I bought for this year's yoga festival for the one next year, so that's a little bit of relief there.
Oh, that's good.
But anyhow, in regards to like how yoga can help people, I mean, for among other things, you say you're like really serious about trying to get people off drug addiction. Well, apparently you can do that. I mean, cannabis isn't relatively addictive compared to other drugs, but for some people it is more so. Like Ricky Williams, the NFL running back, who was able to quit cannabis, he says, because he took up yoga. Well, if yoga can do that for someone who's a cannabis addict, then well, I'm sure it can do lots of other beneficial things. But is yoga? You seem to be more inclined to like the Pink Heart's Wellness for women to help women. I'm not to say you can't help men and all that, but is like the work that you do regarding yoga and some of the other things for that matter, like more divine feminine based, because you're a woman, and it was a fair question to ask if you were a man, would you be doing more masculine based things, or is that completely beside the point? Is it just like the energy and not so much the gender that you have regarding the yoga you do and all the other things that you do to help women and men and whatnot?
That's actually interesting. They would say that because particularly in the person that I am, this is a conversation that comes up and has come up for probably 30 years and in different circles of my energy field, if you will, and kind of who I am and the way I'm made. And recently I had a conversation with somebody who asked me to pull back on something I was doing in a particular group because, quote unquote, you have a very powerful presence, is what I was being told. And you know, in other words, for this very yin-ish group of people that were gathering, that the yang side of me was a little much, and it was an interesting conversation. But the Pink Heart's Wellness came into existence in 2009 as well, actually part of it was because I was part of the 3-day 60-mile walk thing for Susan Komen, and I was training for the breast cancer and walk, and I somehow Pink Heart's Wellness for Women. I was out with my father, actually, who I took care of him. He had Alzheimer's, but he had Alzheimer's at that time, but it was earlier stages, and he and I were out for a walk. And I don't know why, all of a sudden this word, you know, we were crossing a bridge and we were talking about my mother. We were talking about healing and all my father was into holistic thoughts and the mind-body or psychosomatic connection and things like that. And all of a sudden the words Pink Heart's Wellness for Women came to mind. Now, mind you, I say that because, yes, you see that reference to women. A lot of the work, though, I do for persons on the spectrum are actually there's more males than females as far as the work that I'm doing with Spectrum Kids Yoga and that. But my work as a minister, oftentimes it was a lot of the people who came to me were men, and they felt that that they could relate to me really well and that I related to them. And I had always been told by people that I personally had an energy about me. Like I'd have women say to me, "Well, you think like a man." Well, I didn't know what that meant because I'm inside of my own, person doing what I'm doing. when I would do counseling, men would say that, wow, you have you seem to really understand where we're coming from in relationship to then what is the woman going through. So I don't, somehow in my own world, I think I got blessed in sort of a unique experience. The way Spirit decided to craft me is, yes, the Pink Hearts Wellness piece came into existence because there was a real need at that time period for a lot of women's wellness approaches. And that's something that we created to respond to that. However, I actually have another outreach that I keep kind of quieter, but it's called A Soldier's Heart. And it's working, with veterans, of which there's males. Of course, now there's increasing females that are veterans. There's this energy. So for me, the whole yoga piece is not so much about gender, but about the embodiment of who we are as this human being having this experience, and how is it that we can use the different aspects of the physiology and the anatomy, the physical movement mixed with how, what our mental, what happens to our sense of the way our mind is working and the way our emotions are working, as we become increasingly aware of how our bodies move and where we hold tension. And, can we push the envelope on this or not push it? Or maybe my entire yoga practice today is child's pose. It was one up dog, one down dog, and the rest of the time you were in child's pose. So, there's that sense of that. And for my own world is that I know I was blessed by being created in this particular, world around the planet as the woman. So in other words, I get to embody the divine and sacred feminine, living this life as, as in this womanly form. And, what does it mean to go through all the things that it means to be inside of a woman's body, childbirth, oh my God, all this, other aspects of this. And yet, for some reason, I've always been really well connected to the masculine, if you will, or the masculine understanding of pieces, and I consider that a real gift. So really, actually, half of my clients are male that come to me. We have a great time. We relate, and again, there's just I don't know what happens. Maybe I just sort of step out. I've had people who've done past life analysis on me that said, I've done more times understanding existence and probably the male embodiment than necessarily the female that comes up. To me, it's all beautiful. However you show, you're in one body, you're in the other body. And we may experience a spectrum of what it means to be in that embodiment. And I personally think the yoga piece of it really kind of helps us to just, the word yoga itself is yoking or union of, bringing our awareness together. You are right. There are people who talk about have used aspects of yoga to go into recovery. In the eating disorder world, I know a lot of people who will tell you that it wasn't being force-fed and told that they needed to eat 5,700 calories a day that healed them of their eating disorder. On the contrary, it made them feel worse. It wasn't the weigh-ins. It wasn't being strapped to a table with a feeding tube that healed them. It was actually creative expression. It was mindfulness, and it was the aspects of, again, the yoga. Understanding we are a physical being, that we exist in the world. We take up space. Okay. How do we move in the space that we take up? And literally, how do we move in the sense of how do we move our emotions? Emotion is, there's the word motion is inside of emotion. How are we in motion? How are we learning? How are we navigating and adapting? So I personally, the yoga piece is a huge piece that I love, but it's also a huge piece I love because it's where I insert aspects of occupational therapy trainings that I've had. It's where I insert educational kinesiology. It's where I insert things that have to do with primitive reflexes. So when I'm working with the energy flows of the body and there's the mechanics of yoga, but then there's all this other wonderful stuff going on in this amazing human body that we have.
Like how you say, amazing human body. That's a really positive attitude towards something that many people would wish they didn't incarnate into, saying, why do I have to incarnate into such a dense thing? Well, look, there's a lot of positive things to it. Keep an open mind about it. We're in great times of great consciousness expansion. So I like your attitude. And like I said before, keep up the good work with everything. So that being said,
Thank you.
I guess we'll bring this interview to an end. But first, before we do that, of course, you can take the last couple minutes here to get at anything you like, get out your contact info, all your websites for that matter, any appearances you're going to make in the future and whatnot. So, Robin V Schwoyer, take us out to the end.
Well, thank you again, Andrew, for this opportunity to chat with you, and hopefully those who will tune in and hear this, walk away with something. Go vibrate again with your greatness. I am in the process of actually revamping my web presence. So yes, there is happyheartsyoga.com. There is pinkheartswellness.com. Those are both websites that are in terrible need of, or wonderful need, however you look at it, of being revamped. There is sereneteen.com. You can go there and begin to see some introductory information about who we are there. Our autism group, again, we're all volunteer. We're always looking for resources and volunteers, and that is Hearts for, F-O-R. It's heartsforautism.org. So that's an organizational one. That's a great place to go and learn a little bit more about who we are there. If you want to email me, the easiest place to get in touch with me is actually just my regular, I have too many email accounts at this point, so the easiest one is to use R, V as in Victor, SCHWOYER @gmail.com, and that's basically RV Schwoyer, Robin V Schwoyer, at Gmail. And like I said, I'm in the process now of spending some time and resources to recraft who I am and how I represent all of these facets of all the outreaches that I have. So that's why, like I said, my websites are kind of in a holding pattern at the moment. It's a great time. I love being out there doing what I'm doing and reaching out to people and helping people. I love to see the connections and the ahas and those amazing moments and to see healing happening. Healing is always possible. There's always a way to come into a sense of peace and confidence and calm about who we are, and yet still have a really powerful, active presence in the world to bring about good and to bring about change. I will be going around and speaking at different places. One place that I'm at a lot is Solutions for Daily Living in Newtown, and that's actually spelled Soul-lutions in Newtown. So I'm there a lot. I do teaching and healing work there, so you can always look me up on the calendar there. Otherwise, check back, and hopefully we will see in the course of the next 6 months my revamped stuff with the announcements of some of the traveling that I'm going to be doing in 2019 that uplifts a lot more of this work in a very more integrated pattern. A lot of the pieces are sort of coming together in a wonderful way. So that will be, look for that. But again, I really appreciate this opportunity to be on the air with you. So thank you so much, and hearts blessings and lots of love to everyone out there.
And lots of love to you too. So pleasure having you on. Namaste. Enjoy the rest of your trek down into consciousness, and maybe I'll run into you at some future appearance. Take care. Pleasure having you on. Learned a few things myself. Namaste. Bye-bye.
Namaste, and thank you.